thank you, everyone. What I'd always like to start off with is at events like this is that there's lots of acknowledgements of country and a welcome to country as well. So I like to talk around something that's happened to me recently. So I've been going out with some strong, proud Aboriginal women who are working in Water Corporation to look at particular sites where we can better integrate the stories that they want to share, but also think around the importance of the knowledge they have and how they can be integrated into sites as well. And as Giles so carefully put, that's part of the reconciliation process. So that's something that I'm working on now and just wanted to share as a beginning. So as we start to think around this space is that Water Corporation is kind of an interesting organisation where it sits as a government trading entity, which means it has to work a little bit differently, has to think around economic spaces, strategic spaces, but then also social and environment as well. And then as you hear today, there are so many different types of words that come through in this space, it can actually become quite confusing, and particularly for an everyday person. That's okay. That's okay.
No, that's really sad. Oh,
That's okay.
she's gone away completely now.
She said she's had enough. She said keep moving. She said you're on a time limit, Jeremy.
Okay.
And so Rachel, what she talks to is everything but the words that we use in this room today, right? So she's talked about a wetland that we looked at some time ago, and she talks around what it actually means for people, to be able to walk down to a place, to enjoy it, to be proud of it, to be something that works into people's lifestyle and doesn't use any of the words that we'll use in the room today. And that's really important to me because often with our design work, we get down into some real specifics because we need to, but for the community, it's just around building the urban habitat that we need for now and in the future as well. And just kind of coming back to that point is really important. And in that note, we can sort of think to the ideas of what Jan Gould brings to urban planning, but also the way that we can think around our assets as well, is that he talks around how traditionally we do buildings, then space, then let the people move around that, as opposed to good planning of thinking around people first, and then the spaces, and then the buildings. And interestingly, that really speaks to water-wise cities, because water-wise cities is around integrating our assets into the city, and that's essentially what Jan Gould's talking about as well in this space. So we can see I always work towards City of Canning because I'm always super jealous of the work they were able to do there. It was always just the next step up from the work I was doing. But this is Lake Street, and it kind of always occurs to me that this is a case in point where there's people on the left live in those houses, live on a park, can't get to the park because we've put a piece of infrastructure in between them. And so from a big planning perspective, great outcome, people near parks. When you actually live there, problematic. And so everyone in this room now will be familiar with all these sort of terms and the idea of what are the benefits of urban greening. But my question now is, after building a number of projects, is why isn't this just business as usual, and why isn't this integrating in? And so all the parts that I'm looking at the moment is exactly that idea. If it's in our strategies, how are we integrating all of this work into everyday projects, I guess? And if we do an environmental scan of where the state government's at, is that all of these words are already integrated into so much of the state's policy. We have words like liveability, stormwater, urban heat, greening, water-related ecosystems. And so the strategic environment is already there, and it's already been integrated into what do we need to do. And I really like this because Debbie Besh introduced herself a little bit earlier in the day, so I'll bring it back to her. But when I was a young kid coming out of uni, I was working at a council where petunias were the main landscape species of choice. And so I used to go across to Debbie and have a little cry around how hard the world is in local government, and she'd sort of give me a pat on the way. But these concepts then were really different, and we've moved so far ahead. And that's just like this really interesting point for me to see them now all in these state government strategies. And then as you'll see today, these projects aren't actually as hard as everyone made them out to be. Yes, they're technically challenging and yes, they're things to do, but we do a lot harder stuff in the state in terms of technical design and delivery. It's really around this idea of how we bring it into normal business. And just to kind of go through some of these projects in case we haven't seen them before, we've got Mary Crescent in the top left-hand corner. The little before images are in pictures just in case you don't see them. But this was just like a $50,000 project of how do you convert a basin into a micro wetland. The one on the bottom left-hand corner is at Peters Place. So this is where I was working at the city at the time, where Watercorp wanted to build a basin to help with capacity and flooding in the area. And we said, look, just give us that same amount of money and we'll build a micro wetland and provide the capacity that you want, but the greening outcomes that we want as well. Top right-hand corner is a sewage pump station. So underneath there is some tanks where if the pump fails, the sewer goes into the tank rather than everyone's houses. But the community got together and built a community garden there. And of course, Giles has just finished off with Wharf Street wetland as well. So all stuff that's been done before. But the problem with some of these projects, except for the Peters Place one, is that they're being done at the end of design or the project is already in place. From an asset life cycle perspective, that means that there's not a need for renewal as the asset's doing what it was meant to do. And so to do this sort of work at that point is the most expensive and is potentially the least effective in terms of where to do this. And so the question is how do we bring this back to the front of the life cycle process where it's the least expensive and the most effective? Hopefully I got that the right way around. And then that's what we're looking at Water Corporation now. So Jason's here somewhere, I can't see him now, up the back there, who's obviously led for this whole time the work around drainage for livability and shown that these projects can be delivered and the world doesn't end yet. And now the next stage is to say, so how do we integrate that sort of thinking into all of our assets and as they get delivered? How does livability as a big concept get delivered into them as well? And so going back to Lake Street is that we know that this is the expectation that the community will have of us in the future, but thinking around what is a climate adaptive space, a climate adaptive urban form, the picture on the right is obviously the one that we want as opposed to the picture on the left. And yet if you stand on the street and look one way, one's on one side and one's on the other. For Water Corporation, we talk towards this idea that where the trickiness comes is a government trading entity is required to act commercially, and it also loses things like the protection of the Crown. And so there isn't a specific mandate to have those outcomes come through that make it tricky in our process when we apply for money through to the State Treasury to deliver particular projects. That then cascades down to thinking around levels of service and how do we have that as a business as usual response. And then I put up here the idea of the disconnect between who pays and who benefits. And at the end of the day, all of Water Corp's money is actually all the Treasury's money, and all the Treasury's money is actually all the people's money. But the question is how do we work that through a financial process to make sure that we're investing in the places that we want to as a community? And then finally, I've just said these projects are really easy, but integrating them into large organisations where there's multiple moving parts ends up being tricky because there's a whole people, process, technology activity that needs to be done as well. But slowly we're working through that process. And one of the key points that I wanted to talk about now was the idea of, again, when I was in local government, is we'd be doing these restoration projects, but often we would say all of these sustainability challenges are happening at once for one location, while my particular question was to say, if I'm working on a site, which is the biggest issue for that site, which often will provide the best return for the benefit as well. So is it really about a tree matter, or is it around access to public open space, or is it around a water quality matter? And that means that whilst the end projects often look the same to the lay person, it means that we can really calibrate the design to have the outcomes that we should have and maximise that benefit back to the community. So I could never find the layers, and when I could find them, they'd be all over the place, and half the time the websites wouldn't work as well. So we said, why don't we try and get all those layers into one place? So we've developed a pilot portal now where we've got the sort of standard environmental layers of bush forever sites and endangered flora and fauna and so forth, but starting to move into those ideas of where are we short on public open space, where are the nature links, what is the land use, and then the bit that I get quite excited about is the people space as well. So going back to that amazing video you just saw of Rachel Roberts, is that there's layers of things like where is the greatest psychological distress? Where is the lowest levels of exercise? And a whole gambit of these as well. So we know that greening can have financial returns for all of those places. The question is how do we balance that up? So as I keep fanboying City of Canning and their work that they've been doing, is that they were complete leaders in this space of picking an activity area, thinking across the whole site, not just individual projects, and then integrating this idea of how do you build good cities that are green cities, and working through projects like Wharf Street and Lake Street. And then we can start to do, this is a back of the envelope calculation, but we can start to see the idea that Wharf Street costs $3 million to build, which I was one of those people that said, geez, that seems like a lot of money. But when we think around what the return for investment is, that's some $20 million of investment of return of investment to the community in areas like particularly public health, but also thinking around things like greenhouse gases as well. So we're taking this type of thinking and process through now with a number of local governments as a portal, as a trial or as a pilot. And we've got some 6 local governments that we're working with now. The key one that we've been doing work at the moment with is City of Belmont. So we've taken through this mapping process to say what are the big picture issues going on, and then work with the city to say, particularly their parks manager, to say, okay, what is the vision for the city from a local government's perspective? Where is all their activity happening, and where is that happening going forward? And then looking then at water corporation assets and saying, how can they do better? What are the key ones that could have real transformational outcomes for the Belmont community? And so we found some that might be able to help urban infill. We found some that connect communities to the river. And we found some that just do urban greening and water quality as well. So now we're working across a whole landscape scale place, but we can also think around the ideas of how do we connect in then tree planting programs or parks programs, which is the local government expenditure, to support some of these outcomes like the green links. So I'm not quite there yet, but in terms of what this whole portal looks like, because we did a pilot and then it seemed like it became really useful. So this year we're working with ECU and UWA to go through 2 activities. One is to get as many layers as we can. So my request is, if people have layers that they think would be useful, please email me, because I'm trying to get that big pool of layers together. And we'll have this portal up and running with a very specific intent that it's free for everyone to use. So everyone can see what is going on in their local government areas or their state areas. And essentially we're all reading off the same book, with the concept that the solutions that we need to come from open information that's available to everyone. So that's what this does. And then secondly, we'll have a look at the idea of how do we combine all of these disparate social, environmental, sustainability layers to identify where is greening needed the most, and where would the greatest return for investment be as well. Not to say that's the only place, but just to try and think about it from a broader Perth perspective, and particularly an equity perspective as well. So moving forward with this, I've kind of summed up what we're going to do in Water Corporation. We're looking through the ideas of how these could be integrated into our assets as we deliver them. We're working through the idea of this portal that's being developed now as well. And then I guess anyone that's kind of interested that hasn't heard me speak yet, please come and have a chat to see if there's a local government aspect that you'd like to speak about, or if there's an infrastructure aspect that you'd like to speak about as well. And so I forgot about this. In the end of it all, my kids in 2050 are going to be in like their late 20s, early 30s, right? So when I learned about climate change, it was by people that are probably entering their 90s as we speak right now. So it was kind of a different vibe and a different part. But I think about my kids at that age going, geez, they're going to have such a different life and quality of life to what I got to experience. But this is the 25-year lead up where we can think around Perth being like Jurien, and what do we need to do now to build that urban habitat that they'll need as well? And that's everything, thanks.